A note from
Doug, he passed a message to me. I'm at City Hall.
Okay.
He needed to charge for a moment or two before it was going to turn on, but he'll chime in as soon as he can here.
Okay, great. So Councillor Logan just sent me a text saying Wi-Fi is down at his work, so he won't be able to attend via video. But we have quorum here. So I'm going to call the meeting to order.
Oh, just a moment. Sorry, we're not quite ready here. I'm just getting it to go. Okay, just a moment.
Just let me know.
Doug, you're assuming you have more power than you actually have here.
I believe in starting meetings on time and getting them finished on time.
It took me a while to thaw out yesterday, Stuart.
Okay, so it's ready to go for you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Amanda. So I'm going to call the City of Colwood Economic Prosperity Committee meeting to order. It's Monday, October 26, 2020. And at this time, I would like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the shared traditional lands of the Coast Salish people. May I get a motion, please, to approve the 2.1, the near-term, long-term, and Economic Prosperity Committee meeting agenda for today, October 26th. And Councillor Jensen, perfect, thank you very much. Let's go move this over here, see it. Okay, there we go. And may I get any discussion on the agenda?
Doug?
Yes.
I'm just wondering what happens to past motions and stuff. I noticed back in June, we passed a few motions of things to happen. And I'm wondering what happens to them. They just wait till we hear, or do they stay on a list somewhere? Or should they be kept up in old business? I'm just wondering.
That's a good question, actually, Councillor Parkinson, because I've always wondered that just from our council meetings, actually. So, but it's a good question.
Can I chime in on that?
Yes, Councillor Baxter, please.
At various times in the city, there have been lists kept. I don't know if there is one now or not, for council and for certain committees. And there's the option of either having that list presented at, regular meetings, not necessarily all of them, or of just being sent out to councillors for their review every so often. So that's an ongoing list that's updated all the time. So those are options open to us if we want to ask for them.
Excuse me, I can answer that question. Any motions that are made at your Economic Prosperity Committee meeting would go to council because you're making a recommendation to council. If you're asking staff to do items, then it normally would come back to the committee with any kind of information that you were requiring.
I guess Amanda, just I'm going to ask you a question on that one then. So I guess, yes, that's how it normally works at council meetings and committee of the whole. But I guess there's never a running list, so we never ever know when the items are going to be coming back. That's the problem. They seem to be lost in space, and then, a month later or 2 months later or 6 months later or a year later, the item reappears again. So, it's a really good point that Councillor Parkinson has made.
Okay, so we're recently we've started putting on our near-term agenda the recommendations from these committees so that they don't get lost and dropped off. So we will make note of the comments here today and make sure that we have those included on the near-term agenda, or if there's going to be another way to track them, then we'll provide you that information as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Amanda. The chair recognizes Mr. Borhill. Ian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got our CAO, Robert Earl, would like to make a comment.
Okay,
Chair
Earl.
Kobayashi, to answer the question from Councillor Parkinson, the purpose of the near-term and long-term agenda is to capture direction given either by committee or council into the lists that Councillor Baxter was referencing. The near-term agenda is intended, and the long-term agenda are intended to be lists that capture action items coming out of these and or other council committees.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Earl. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to call the question. Can I have anyone that opposes the motion? Seeing none, I shall move on to item 3.1. May I have a motion to adopt the Economic Prosperity Committee meeting minutes from September 14th, 2020. Councillor Baxter, please. Thank you. Any discussion? I'll just have to lower your hands here. Used to be this master one here. Okay, so any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those opposed? Seeing none, items passed. Public participation, no one has called in to participate, and there has been no written submissions, so I'm going to skip over the public participation and go straight to item 5.1. Is a delegation, Mr. Ty Whitaker, from the Executive Vice President, Colliers International, who's going to do a presentation on the Greater Victoria Commercial and Industrial Development Outlook. And if I can call upon Mr. Borhill to introduce Mr. Whitaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we're really lucky to have Mr. Whitaker here today. He is, I would argue, the top commercial real estate broker in the region, having represented institutional clients in Greater Victoria, including School District 62, the City of Victoria, the City of Langford, as well as being involved in some of the most significant land sales in Colwood's history, including the Royal Bay lands. He's now involved with representing Omicron at the Allendale site, and is here to give the committee a chance to learn about the current dynamics within the real estate market, particularly in the commercial industrial sectors. We're seeing a historic levels of new industrial and commercial growth here in Colwood. And we thought that Mr. Whitaker's expertise would be helpful in the following discussions regarding tax diversification within Colwood. So with that, I will ask Mr. Whitaker to join the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. Mr. Whitaker, welcome. Whoops, you're on mute. Got to get you to unmute yourself. Nope, you're still mute. Okay, there you are.
There we go. Good, good, good. I was, the instructions were somebody else was going to unmute me, but so I know some of you, and I've pedaled my bike around with Stuart in the past, and yeah, and have been sort of an active commercial broker out in the West Shore for a number of years, and it's pretty exciting to see how the West Shore, and in particular Colwood, is now coming into its own with some really telling economic diversification and growth with all the success that you're having out there. So I primarily focus on the industrial business park market, ranging from all the way out to the Sydney area, Keating Crossroad for Central Saanich. Saanich has Royal Oak Industrial Business Park, and then we've got our downtown core. And for the longest time, people were not prepared to locate their businesses out in the West Shore just because of, I think, delay and infrastructure issues with traffic. And that fundamentally has now changed. I think the Mackenzie Road interchange work that's being done has just flip that on its head, and it now doesn't take that long to get in and out and move around Victoria. And the other interesting point that I'm seeing is that there's an economic argument for locating your business out in the West Shore because of all the young families that are living out there, and there's some employment benefits to having your employees who are all living out there having less of a commute time. So I thought I'd just kind of go over what we're seeing in the marketplace right now, maybe pre-COVID and then during COVID, and how I think we're going to be spilling out of this. And I can kind of touch on all points and maybe make the statement right now is that I think our economy right now is a bit of a sort of a false sense of security in that we're all being propped up by government subsidy. And the reality is that a lot of these businesses, if they didn't have that subsidy, would all be failing right now. And it'll be interesting to see how, if vaccinations happen and we can get back to a normal life, how some of these companies are going to be coming out of it. I do think retail and storefront retail in particular is we're predicting probably a third of all existing businesses to be failing right now. And, optimistically, that's not going to be the case. But that's also a byproduct of the fundamental shift on how people are now buying product and shopping and deciding if they need something, how they're going to get it to themselves. And I don't know about you guys, but I certainly know the UPS driver's first name when he shows up to my door on a fairly regular basis. So, the retail storefront that you used to get in your car and drive there and pick something up and bring it home is now so profoundly changed that there are more and more distribution companies wanting to get to the island to do this type of last mile distribution, which, if retail is going to be suffering, the industrial market is actually benefiting from that. The industrial market right now, pre-COVID, had a vacancy rate of 0.81%, so less than 1%. And that was back in February. We just did our September analysis, and we actually have a lower vacancy rate now of 0.73%, which is kind of astounding to think that the world's hurting a lot and the market continues to constrict. And there's a lot of companies that are needing to expand and grow, and they just don't have the opportunity to do so. So there's a lot of people chasing this business park type model of development. And I'll commend, I guess, Colwood in being kind of ahead of the game, in particular on the Allendale District properties, watching the developer go through that process of approvals and development permits and so forth. And I think we benefited by dealing with a municipality that is actually being nimble and quick in terms of getting some approvals done, to a point where we can actually deliver product to the market that it needs to be timely, and also that we can sort of have that assurance that we're able to enter into a deal to be able to have it complete and a building built. There's been some pretty exciting news of late, and I think all of you are aware that Victoria Shipyards has signed an 80,000 square foot deal. That was a long-term lease. There's going to be lots of jobs that were in other municipalities that are going to be under Ruse and Colwood now. And that works for them because of the proximity to the Department of National Defense, but also, I think selfishly, a lot of the employees, if they had a choice, who a lot of them live out in the West Shore, wanted to have a place of work in the West Shore, which is great. We're now launching Lot C, which is just down Allendale, across from what will be a Carson Automotive Group dealership. And we've got up to about 142,000 square feet of building that we can construct there. And encouragingly, almost on a weekly basis, there's a new group coming and knocking on our door wanting to see about doing business in this community and having a building built for them. So I think that's there as well. It just depends on form and character and what ends up being in that marketplace. I think the M2 zone that you guys have for Allendale also allows for some office, and that's another market category that everybody's wondering, is everybody going to be going back to the office and working, and is there going to be demand for office? And I've consistently been indicating I do think private businesses need to have interaction and accountability and a culture that is being fostered by everybody being under one roof. And we're seeing just recently the provincial government announcing that they would like people to be coming back to work, even if it's a 2 or 3 day a week type work week. And that will benefit our downtown and benefit the retailers that are in the neighborhood. So I would also, in terms of forward thinking of what you would like to attract to your community, I know Royal Bay's got all sorts of grandiose plans of what will ultimately be there. And it'll be interesting how the world spills out of COVID and what their existing plans are today, or their pre-COVID plans were for having retail and coffee shops and all this other stuff, and ultimately what is built there. So I'd encourage you for whatever lands that you can identify, the industrial business park, and I don't necessarily like calling it industrial, I like calling them business parks, because within a business park you have technology, you have office, you have distribution, you have manufacturing, and they're very dynamic businesses in their own right. They're not just an industrial user that needs a yard to lay down a whole bunch of pipe or excavation machines or something like that. And there continues to be a lot of demand I see looking forward here. In terms of competition to Colwood, you guys have always been competing against your next door neighbor being Langford. And Langford does have and has had a number of industrial parks that they, I think maybe generically have sort of seen come to the marketplace. I don't think they've necessarily been really identifying some major areas that they like to see as business park, but just down the road on Souk Road, the Beatty Group, which is one of the largest industrial developers in Western Canada, came in and have made a play for about a 10-acre parcel there. They'll hit the market and be competitive to Colwood. Western Speedway is also on the market. Whether there's going to be an eventual sale there, we'll have to watch and see. Center Mountain, that you're all aware of, does have an industrial component to it. They're probably 2 or 3 years away from really having services and the mountain sort of shaped and being able to do deals there. There's a lot of folks that are chasing this product category just because it is so strong and seems to make the most sense for everybody. But you know, if there were 2 or 3 other Allendale districts within your community, there would certainly be demand for it, and certainly be the attraction for developers or the owners of the land to go off and develop for themselves. You know, is that sort of a bit of a broad overview for you? Does anybody have any questions?
Councillor Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. This is great. And for someone who is unsophisticated in the ways of commercial real estate, can you tell us what we can do as a community to help compete with perhaps these other locations that are coming up? How do we I mean, beyond the usual, stripping red tape and the like, but what can we do to attract the types of businesses that we're looking to complement our strategic plan and our vision for the community? Maybe you can speak about that briefly, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and just kind of watching the dance that was done when we became engaged with Victoria Shipyards. They put their hand up. They were definitely keen to be able to proceed with this. So one, you had existing zoning in place that the developer then didn't have to go off and spend 12 to 18 months negotiating with council to get the zoning that needed to be done. But then there was also, I think, the appropriate amount of engagement and introduction when the developer needed to have the ear of council and the mayor and staff. Everybody was aware and everybody was available. And I think that also helped the saleability of this and the messaging to a major, really multinational client that you guys wanted them there. And there was a real good messaging to that effect. The typical red tape kind of thing that I understand, and everybody needs to be able to address that. Where I'm seeing success and the ability for municipalities to get to the finish line of being able to attract folks is maybe going through a sort of an overview and a plan of this is where we would like another industrial node. And I know you're going through zonings with Royal Bay, and that's maybe not the place for an industrial node to be, but there's certainly areas around Colwood that you could identify very easily. And one thing I would say is that the economics of land development right now, and this is kind of an interesting point in that, 2 or 3 years ago, industrial land was probably worth, I'd say $20 to $25 zoned and service ready to go. And the market is so tight right now that it's now worth $40 to $45 a square foot. And that's on a per acre basis, that's about $1.7 million per acre. And there's no other land category, office, suburban residential, suburb type of tract housing that can afford to pay that kind of money for land. So the most valuable land right now is also industrial or business park land that allows people to do their business. So to answer your question, I'd circle the map on a couple spots that you would like to see have an expansion of a business park. And that's really the way of the future. And I think we're going to see, that retail strip and storefront really, really struggling, but you're going to also see demand for distribution and businesses getting into sort of high ceiling warehouse more and more.
Okay, thank you very much. Answer your questions there, Dean. Okay. I have Councillor Day and then Councillor Parkinson on deck.
Thank you. One of the considerations in a number of municipalities has been looking at dedicated employee housing. And I've heard similar stories of trying to kind of address the rental market issue through that. I'm just wondering what your take would be on the effectiveness of that type of blending of industrial and residential.
There are some examples of that. If you drive down Lee Road off the Trans-Canada in Langford, there's a number of those strata warehouse buildings that were constructed. And originally they were constructed kind of at a design flaw in that they had a warehouse at grade and then they were going to do a bunch of office above. And most folks, when they are renting or buying industrial, they want the ability to have a high ceiling and functionality of their space instead of having something capped over them and only having, say, a 12-foot high ceiling. And I think that design failed, and they very quickly then had to switch around and actually market the units as residential on the top. So they could be live work, or they're just straight apartment. And then the ground floor would be commercial, and that actually worked. And I'd like to see more of that if possible. Most zonings allow a residential night watchman suite to be on one lot. And a lot can typically have 5 or 6 little units that are built on it, but you're only allowed to have one person living and working or just living on the property as a night watchman. So that's maybe a creative way of stacking housing on top of industrial. And that's a bit of a trend that we're seeing in Vancouver, in that before you just have, you know, a 20-foot high warehouse and that's it. But why don't you have a 20-foot high warehouse with some apartments on top of it? So for a developer, it makes sense to have some bonus density for affordable housing requirements or employment housing. That makes a lot of sense as well. So density is not a bad thing, and it's a way of, you know, enabling more housing to maybe become a little bit more affordable.
Great. And the other thing when you first spoke about kind of the competition in industrial lands, it seemed like you were kind of heading towards there's an awful lot of competition out there. And then you sort of identified that actually there's increasing demand for it. So I'm just wondering how much of a factor is the competitiveness in that particular zone?
It is a factor, and the ones that I identified, it's interesting. In Keating, there's nothing available for sale for land. Western Speedway is right now a hope and a dream by the vendors. Center Mountain is 2 or 3 years away, if not 5 years away. So there's nothing actively being marketed. There's transactions that are maybe going to be happening here, but again, demand right now, if you had industrial land that was ready to go, you would have developers who want to come in and develop it, and you'd have end users wanting to be in your community for sure. The one thing that I do caution people when they're engaging with us and asking about the market is just how much absorption is there, and how much new supply can the market typically handle. And we only have a marketplace of, say, 9.2 million square feet. And comparing that to the rest of Canada, that is really, really small potatoes. Maybe that's the reason that one guy like me is just doing that market, because there's just not a whole lot of there's not a lot of room for a whole bunch of commercial brokers clamoring around in that space. That's almost the same square footage as our office environment and inventory. You'll traditionally see absorption of, say, I'm predicting we're going to see in the West Shore about 300,000 square feet of new building or new supply over the next 12 months in the West Shore. And that's absorption and new supply. Right now, the only way that we're going to alleviate the compressed vacancy that we've got down to that 0.73% is we need to build our way out of that. So there still is demand.
Great, thank you.
Councilor Parkinson.
Thank you, Doug. Thanks for that, Ty. So we did, in fact, approve live work in Allendale on Lot C. So we'll have some time to see whether we did it right or not, and if it's popular. So you'll be happy to hear that, I guess.
Good.
I guess I wanted to sort of grill you a little bit on, do you think this is a long-term trend? I think within this council, we had a report. I don't know if it was your firm or one of the other firms on sort of um, housing markets and development market. And one of the things that seemed to indicate in that report was, yeah, don't get your hopes up too much about industrial development. It's all going to go to Langford, and there's lots around. So you're singing a greatly different tune than that one. So do we think this is a blip, or do we really think this is a long-term shift that we could really rely on for years to come?
I think it's a long-term shift, certainly. And I think that report was authored probably 2 or 3 years ago. And quite frankly, it's dated.
It was within this council, so no more than 2 years ago.
Okay, yeah. So again, it's probably dated. And I remember helping, I think it was Colliers that authored that report and having some commentary. The safest thing that most people will develop is residential, because there's a massive amount of people and a massive amount of demand. And that's something I didn't touch on, is that the residential market is undergoing sort of this phenomenal growth and activity that's happened since COVID started. And what if we're living off a residential market that's very strong, there's contractors that are booking themselves out for years. Major roofing contractors and building contractors can't see the end of this, and they keep looking around the corner sort of 12 months down the road. Everybody is busy. You guys are going to have new schools built out in your community. That's the trickle down effect to that is unbelievable. So ever since I've been doing that, I've been doing this for 21 years now. And we've had this stability in our marketplace for industrial. It's always kind of risen, and it's always been consistent. So if you're wanting to attract a consistent model of economic growth to your marketplace, then I do think this business park use is something that you guys could continue to be focused on.
Thank you. Thanks, and good to see you, Ty.
Yeah, good seeing you.
Councillor Baxter, followed by Mr. Molnar. Unmute, Mike.
Mark that one up, Dean. Ty, you just said that the safest development is residential. And is that tied to how fast you get your money back before the trend can change? Or is it more just tied to the demand that's greater than all the others?
I think it would be tied to the demand. That's it's like there's just way more fish in the aquarium for residential, and it's a safer way for people to get in and get out. Instead of, you think of Allendale, and Allendale's has been this tremendous success where, we put the Ridleys under contract, we sell the property, and we've got 3 of the 4 parcels kind of spoken for. That's pretty easy business, but you've got now 6.5 acres of land that now needs to be filled up with businesses. And that will be a longer, more arduous marketing program to find all the different groups that are going to fit into that. So, if residential subdivisions available, yeah, you're going to have a lot more demand from people wanting to buy and build and sell. Just because there's not as many, there's only one Victoria shipyard in the world. And, I keep telling anybody who can listen what a sweetheart deal that was, because you don't have that type of caliber of tenant coming along and knocking on your door on a daily basis. So, that's one to certainly hold up, and you guys were a big part of that.
So given that, if we want a certain area to be developed as industrial, then it would probably be wise to pre-zone it as industrial only, in the same way that the Allendale lands that are developing now were zoned that.
Correct, yeah.
Now, if we compare that to commercial, given what you said about a third of the commercial businesses failing, perhaps.
Retail.
Retail, Yeah. Then if we want an area to develop as retail, then we better pre-zone it retail only.
I'd agree, but you also better be ready to maybe do a couple zoning amendments when retail doesn't make sense there.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, I've got examples where people pre-COVID have gone off and, you know, planned for a Canadian Tire to go up, and you know, they are able to attract that type of caliber of tenancy as an anchor, but the retail demand for anything else is gone, and people are then having to rejig their plans on what they thought was going to be a retail node, and have the, you know, the anchor being able to support all these other companies that will live off of that one anchor. That model right now is not working.
so, yeah, I completely get that you've got to be then flexible and not, you know, force the landowner to wait too long if he can't get it filled up. But if on the other hand, it goes straight to residential, then I would think that modern residential, even if it's, you know, 4 stories or more, it's difficult to go back and convert that ground floor to commercial.
It is, yeah, yeah. You know, there's some examples, and you guys don't have this issue yet, but it'll happen to you when you have densification, and everybody starts running out of land, and how do you accommodate the demand for people, one, to live in this area and also to work in the area and have this, and you know, there's some examples in Vancouver, in particular in Mount Pleasant, where they have very funky, cool businesses at grade with high ceilings, breweries and the like, and then they have stacked office and stacked residential above that. And I think, you know, you guys have the land that you don't necessarily need to consider that yet, but I think that will be a trend that you'll start seeing in the city of Victoria, to have that kind of that mix and the flexibility. And the one thing I will say when I look at different municipalities and how they deal with zonings is to have as broad a zone as possible to allow as many users to come along and do business in their community. You know, Central Saanich is quite bad at this. City of Victoria is quite bad at this. Saanich is quite bad at this, and that they have some old archaic zones that nobody has looked at for 30 years. And you know, you're not allowed to do a brewery there because nobody's ever thought that craft brewery would be a cool thing to do. And you're allowed to do that in the City of Victoria's M3 zone, but you're not allowed to do it in an M2 zone, and half the industrial is M2. And unfortunately, the answer is no, instead of, yeah, welcome to our community and let's do business.
So if one is wanting commercial in a certain area, rezoning it to be, you know, 1 floor of commercial or more, with housing stacked on top, gives the developer a chance to get money out of that through sale of the housing, and wait longer for the commercial to fill in. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think, you know, the typical model of having like a condo, for example, and you look at all these condos that are being developed, and most municipalities would say, well, let's put commercial at grade and do residential above, and we've got a nice little flex space. What I'm seeing now is that commercial at grade, there's very limited demand for it, and hopefully things will get back to normal when we're out of this COVID issue. But right now, you can't give that stuff away. And but if that commercial had more of a flavor that you could do some sort of manufacturing in it, or technology, or office, or something a little bit more broad, than turning it into a nail salon or a hair studio or a coffee shop, then that developer will have a better chance of making that thing economically viable and then proceeding with the development.
Great. Last question. You talked about maybe as much as a third of commercial failing, and I've certainly heard that elsewhere in the world too. But a lot of service commercial turns over frequently. For instance, restaurants. There are some that last the distance, and there are others that keep changing hands while somebody tries to find a way to make a go of it.
Yeah.
And do you think that 2, 3, 4 years from now, when hopefully COVID is in the rear view mirror somewhere in there, that demand might come back, not as strongly as one would hope, but still, some of those businesses that failed because they'd already invested so much and couldn't make money during COVID, so they went down, will be replaced by new businesses. The guy who thinks, now I can make a go of a restaurant, now's my chance.
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
I'm an optimist, and that's what maybe I'm paid to be as well, in terms of cheerleading and making sure that people realize what a neat opportunity we have on the island and what our economy has. I would hope that people will be able to come back and start up a restaurant. I'm also seeing trends where people will open commercial kitchens and you won't have a storefront. You won't have people coming to your place of business. But if you have a Cactus Club, for example, maybe Cactus Club will be doing a commercial kitchen where you order it online and it'll be delivered to your door. I see examples all over town of the last mile Amazon courier guys. And it's unbelievable how Amazon is allowing their packaging to be treated now, because it's shipped over, it's dragged through mud and dirt and loaded into sort of third-party distribution cars where guys have a reflective vest on and off they go for the day. They're not employees of Amazon or not employees of a certain company. It's almost like they're Uber drivers and they're contracted then just to delivery. And I just see Amazon in particular just trying to keep up with the demand and pace what they've created. And it makes me wonder if, the guy selling the suit and tie downtown will be able to continue to do that, or if our economy will then be shifting and having this profound change of how we all shop. I think the coffee shops as an experience will remain, and the bars and the pubs hopefully as an experience will remain. But just how you buy your dog food and toilet paper on a daily basis is I think changing for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Michael. And I see Brent put his hand down. Mayor Martin.
No. I'm sorry, Doug.
Okay, go ahead, Brent.
I unmuted at the same time because I thought I was going to speak, and that all came out wrong. I would love to still have my hand up if there's an opportunity to do so, Councillor. Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Kobayashi. Ty, Brent Molnar speaking. First off, hello. Thank you very much for agreeing to field these questions and share your wisdom and insight with us. Just the sheer nature that you're able to speak and the breadth of information that you're able to share is a great benefit to us all in the room. I've got some questions that are kind of partly tabled around a question of Councillor Day, and also partly tabled around some other comments and questions about antiquated bylaws or procedures or methodologies. My question is about the built form. I feel that the context relation of the built form is one of those antiquated statements. And I'm not talking about necessarily the design guidelines of the city being antiquated, but the very visualization techniques that are typically applied to an industrial land base. And I'm curious as to how you see that built form morphing over time. I mean, we are getting applications now that deal with the typical, which is the ground floor bay type environment with the office above and maybe the residential unit above that, which I would consider a very typical context. How are we seeing that morph over time, and how can we, or how can I and the team educate ourselves as to the growth of that built form so we can ensure that we're capturing as varied or as attractive as a market as we can?
Yeah. A warehouse is a warehouse is a warehouse, but a warehouse can be turned into something fairly attractive. And there's different forms and character of what can be built. And I don't know if it's necessarily for a municipality to prescribe to a developer how to build something, but you guys certainly have the ability to talk about form and character and what it ends up looking. Doesn't matter if it's a tin building with galvanized steel on the outside, or if it's a concrete tilt-up building. You can do a lot to make these buildings really, really attractive. And we're building a building right now on the bottom of Lee Road in Langford as you come onto Langford Parkway for MCO Plumbing. And that's a really cool looking building, quite close to the road. It's a first mass timber warehouse that has been built, as far as I know, in southern Vancouver Island, and one that allowed the builder to build quite quickly. They didn't get burned by the increased value of lumber. That is now a major concern for that form and character of construction. But as long as you have some curb appeal and ask these developers to really make these things attractive. I've been in industrial business park warehouses that are better than the building that I'm sitting in downtown Victoria. You can do some really, really cool things with it. And because it's new, and that's the other thing I'd say is most of our industrial inventory is 30 years old. The West Shore doesn't have any old inventory because it was never built. So you have the ability to go off and build something pretty cool and funky that will be around for 60 years and still look pretty neat.
Okay, thank you very much. Mayor Martin?
Oh, Brent's still talking.
I think Brent's giving a thumbs up.
Yeah,
we're good. Okay. Ty, I don't know, I appreciate you just coming and talking to us today. Have you had a chance to look at our Appendix B at all? Have you seen those numbers or anything along those lines? Looking at doesn't look have. Okay. So I'll just preface it. I'll give you some general. So our annual new construction value, it's about 121.5 million growth year over year. Our industrial is about 10 million. Our commercial is at 21 million. Yeah. When you look at from a percentage standpoint, our assessed value for residential is about $4 billion. In 5 years, we're expecting it to be about 4.6, and then there's sort of that growth pattern. Basically, it represents about 93% of our taxation right now. And as we look through our growth pattern over the next 5, 10, and 20 years, it goes from 93 down to 91, down to 89, down to 87%. With the corresponding light industrial and commercial actually increasing. And right now we're about 265 million, or about 6%. And then over 5 years, we're hoping that number goes to 7.2, then up to 8. And then in 20 years or so, we're looking about 9.25%. Do you know, is there any research out there that talks about if that number gets to a certain percentage, it no longer becomes attractive to the business community?
No, I think what you and other municipalities struggle with is how to have that balance. How do you attract people living in your community? And how do you have people to be attracted to work in your community? So no, I've never seen a study where it becomes unbalanced. I think if you were not to go through this planning exercise and you were just going to be a big Royal Bay and just keep doing Royal Bays and it's all subdivision residential, great. But everybody's going to be in their car every morning and driving somewhere else to do business somewhere else. So there's this balance and blend of how do you support the coffee shop and how do you support the industrial guy who wants to do business in your community. And you know, it's not that people even come to Victoria wanting to do business in Victoria. And there's a lot of, I think, wasted time and effort by various maybe not-for-profit groups that are all cheering for the reason to attract business to the island. I find the people that are doing business on the island are homegrown, and they very well might have something that's out in Keating now, and we have to have a compelling enough argument to tell them, you know what, it might be a 20-minute or a 10-minute commute because you live in Broadmead, but all your employees now live out in the West Shore. You should be you're locating your business out in the West Shore. So every municipality is competing for that business, but you very rarely are going to have somebody go, you know what, I really want to do business on the island here. The only reason they're doing business on the island here is because they've made a home here and they live here. It's
right.
Really hard to have people.
Yeah, so I guess part of this exercise for us is to also try and you know, we're trying to build a complete community and a community that, you know, functions healthy from a economic standpoint, and I'm trying to understand and educate myself from a standpoint of what's the perfect balance between that industrial business and then having, and normally your residential will be the major part of any community. Are there communities that you can think of or point to that seem to have that really healthy mix, that seem to be operating from a bottom line standpoint really strong?
Yeah, you know, I actually hold up Central Saanich as a good example of one, being very rural and having a very rural residential housing stock, but then having a strip of industrial with massive businesses on either side of the road catering to all of Victoria. But they're a good example of having a pre-planned business park that has thrived and, quite frankly, now at capacity. And they now need to start answering the questions of, oh, okay, how do we expand this and keep allowing it to grow? Because that's been growing for 30 years and they are at capacity. So Central Saanich is a good example. You know, Langford, I find Langford's planning a bit sporadic, and they're not necessarily a good example of super urban planning, in that somebody comes to them with an idea, sure, there you go, and there's your rubber stamp, and off you build it. But it's not like they're thinking, okay, this should be somewhere else. If you come up with the idea, mow down the trees and off you go. That is one. The city of Victoria, I just think, through being old and mature, they do have a vibrant industrial base, and it's still the largest industrial base. But I see that there's less and less demand to be right in town, and more demand to be probably a little bit further out and able to get into all our different communities.
Awesome. Final question that I have, Chair, through you to Ty. You know, I appreciated your comments earlier when you talked about the Victoria shipyards, and that it's far and few between that you're able to attract that type of business to your community. looking at Colwood and what our assets and what we have available in that, are there in general terms, I'm not talking specific businesses, but in general terms, are there some aspirational things that we should be working towards from a business commercial standpoint that understand in the marketplace, that if we began to look at rezoning, or if we began to do the work on our end, that we could possibly be successful? And I'm thinking more sort of general, for example, horrible example, but aviation, just sort of that broader term thing.
So are you talking about a specific industry, or are you talking about specific areas within your community to identify?
I guess I'm looking for the opportunity. I mean, I feel strong that we could probably identify as a city, we can identify where we could put them, but it's identifying who we want to put there.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I have a weekly call with Omicron every week and reviewing all the people that are looking at the market. And, I'd say the number one trend is distribution and this Amazon phenomenon of people wanting to do a more modern distribution type of facility. And that's not necessarily the sexiest type of business to have, but it's jobs, and you have the land to be able to cater to it, and it's a tax base. And if you can find a place that would facilitate that type of use, there will be demand for that for sure. Technology, there's some cool technology companies that will continue to grow and prosper. And that's such a broad, I find every company we deal with is now a technology company in some capacity or regard. So as I think we originally started talking about this as a way of promoting yourself as Colwood, is identifying either through partnership of landowners or just identifying within OCPs to say, hey, I'm interested in doing this, and I think there's demand for this, and the economics will support what you're wanting to do with the landowners, because that's the most expensive land that would enable them to ultimately cash out of it or develop it.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mayor Martin. I guess I don't see any other questions. I'm just going to end this thing with just a couple of my comments here. Ty, just thank you very much. It was a great presentation. It just confirms everything that I thought I understood about what was happening out there. And I do share your concern that we've, with all this taxation dollars being thrown into our economy right now, it's set us up with a false sense of security. That's for sure. I do think that the real fallout of COVID will hit us once the government stops putting money into the economy, the CERB program, for example. So I do fully agree with you on that. The second question I have is that I had the opportunity of meeting two tech CEOs last week from Vancouver. And what they told me was really interesting was what's driving them to the West Shore here is they heard about us, and I went and visited them a couple of years ago, and it's being driven now. And what it is from their perspective is is employees. And when they came over here, they were shocked at the pricing of homes here compared to, say, Richmond and downtown Vancouver. And so it makes it attractive because this is about getting the right employees, and they're having a hard time recruiting because of the expense of homes and apartments and things like this in the Vancouver area. Yep. So that's one of my comments. But the second question I do have, and I don't know if you're seeing this right now, but I know one of them is, for example, has stated to me flatly that they've in fact found that this working from home isn't as bad as they thought it was. You know, that was the sky is falling, that we're going to be so unproductive. And one company and another one is, for example, my daughter works for an engineering company right downtown Vancouver, and they've decided not to renew their lease because they're finding that having people work from home, they're getting the same productivity, if not more productivity. So is that something that you're seeing in Victoria? If you can comment on that. If
Yeah,
you do.
I think if I've had lots of examples and commentary of entrepreneurial businesses, and it depends on what you're producing. You can give somebody an assignment of maybe software development, and I want it done by Friday, and I don't care if you're up at 3 a.m. doing it. I just want it delivered to me by Friday. There's that type of business that doesn't necessarily need to have office. There's government that they maybe don't have this accountability or culture that they need to be under one roof. And I don't see government ever pulling out of office space. The flip of this is that there's more demand for office because we need more spacing. So if you're in 1,000 square feet today, maybe you need 1,500 square feet down the road. I think culture, accountability, the desire to get out of your house and go to work and have interaction with other human beings is a very important thing. And we're all human beings and social and needing this interaction. And that's what an office provides. So although I think you're going to see people trying, I think you're going to see them become less productive and will be going back requiring office. So to answer your question, I guess there were two parts of it, but to answer your question, I still think there is going to be demand for office long term. Short term, we're just going to play it out. And you're right in terms of your discussion with the tech guys. We do have 3 post-secondary universities. There's all sorts of very bright, well-educated people that will work for less living in Victoria, and they can afford to buy a house less than Vancouver. The one example where I saw a Vancouver outfit, which was Microsoft, and the head of Microsoft Gaming worldwide lived in Victoria. His kids were going to St. Mike's. He wanted his own office in Victoria. So off we rented him 4 floors of a property downtown Victoria. And they set up a gaming studio, and that was a big deal and a big news that somebody would relocate here. And we spun it as, all the people working in the studio were all coming from Vancouver, great wages, cheap housing, great place to live. As soon as that CEO left the company, the studio was shut down and it's no longer in Victoria. So, as great as all those touch points are, it's hard for people to have a transition from coming from Vancouver over here or Seattle or wherever else.
Okay. Seeing no other hands, just on behalf of the committee, Ty, thank you very much for taking the time. It obviously of great interest by the questions and comments that were made. So again, thank you very much and hope to get to meet you in person someday very soon.
Very good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Ty.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, let's get on to new business. 6.1, if I can ask Jill Collinson, our senior planner, to introduce this item. Jill, you're on.
Thanks, Chair Kobayashi. And just to note that the Manager of Finance, Jen Hepting, is in the room here with me. So I'll just share my screen here so that I can provide the presentation. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, so as you know, Tactic 5 under prosperity within the strategic plan calls for the city to establish tax-based diversification targets. However, based on projected growth and development, Colwood's tax base will remain largely residential for the next 5, 10, 20 years and beyond. An alternative to a tax-based diversification target could be considered via a non-residential tax target. So, prosperity targets. As you know, the plan identifies prosperity targets to add 50,000 square feet of developed retail floor area, 6.5 acres of developed industrial land, and 963 dwelling units, all by 2023. So just a note about this slide, the 2020 column will be adjusted to reflect the 2020 reduced business and industrial tax rates that occurred earlier this summer. So there'll be just a shift in numbers under class 1, class 5, and class 6. So, but class 1, 5, and 6 do compile roughly 98% of total property taxes that are received by the city. And the percentage of non-residential taxes has remained fairly consistent in the 22 to 23% range over the last 3 years as well. But we all know lots is happening in Colwood. The table in the bottom corner of the screen notes where we are in relation to prosperity targets as of August 1st. Currently in stream, though, are development applications for Royal Bay and Royal Beach. These two applications alone will enable over 4,900 dwelling units and 115,000 plus square meters of non-residential floor area. Industrial lands within Colwood, in and around Ellendale, are about 20 acres or 8 hectares, and half of this forms the Ellendale district lands. So of those lands, another 4 hectares or 10 acres is also currently partway through various development applications. So these developments are creating the physical capacity to accommodate a variety of commercial and industrial employment opportunities. Based on the in-stream applications noted, targets are anticipated to be met and exceeded, as almost 7,000 square meters of retail floor area and 1,080 plus dwelling units have been permitted. So permitted does not necessarily mean completed, but permitted does mean they're in process. In the last 3 years, no industrial lands have been developed, but we all know this is changing. So lots happening commercially, industrially, and residentially. So you'll notice within the report, Appendix 1 and 2, there's quite a bit of numbers. So I just wanted to run through a couple of things to kind of summarize everything there. So Appendix 1 of your report offers insight to low, medium, and high growth scenarios with projected growth values applied at the 5, 10, and 20-year scenario. Appendix 1 looks at assessed values and tax revenue and offers a percentage of each at 5, 10, and 20 years. It's a lot of numbers, so we'll look at these graphs. Class 1, residential, is in blue. Class 5, light industry, is in red. And Class 6, business, is in green. So I pulled these 3 out as they make up the primary assessment and taxation base for the city. As you can see, over time, there'll be growth in industry and business, but it will be matched and outpaced by residential. So though there'll be a broader commercial and industrial landscape in Colwood, residential will dominate and continue to do so. So this is assessment values. The picture is similar for potential tax values as well. It will continue to be roughly 75%, give or take, residential range. So Colwood's tax base is anticipated to grow, but not to diversify. So with all things anticipated to stay residential in the next 5, 10, and 20 years, rather than tax-based diversification, an alternative target focusing on non-residential could be considered, such as noted above here in Table 5. So this has been extrapolated from Appendix 2 of the report. So targets could be based on a percentage of property taxes paid by class, or it could focus on targets related to Class 5, light industrial, or Class 6, as these areas of non-residential growth is being experienced in Colwood. I've included Appendix 2 here as well, in case we needed it for discussion purposes. So that's my quick overview.
Okay, thank you very much, Jill. Questions for comments for Jill? Councillor Parkinson.
Firstly, Jill, thank you very much. You do write good reports. I think I almost followed all of it. Could we put up the screen the diversification versus development targets again? Is it possible to flip that one up quickly? So if I'm understanding you correctly, sort of Table 4 is, you know, just carry on as we are, and Table 5 is maybe we could go in this direction instead of as we're headed today. And yet it looks to me like the difference is that the residential is just cut in half under Table 5. Am I reading that correctly? And the percentages, could you explain those percentages to me too?
So Table 4 essentially what's been done for the purposes of the report is we assumed a annual evaluation and then applied that at the 5, 10, and 20. So table 4 is the assumed new assessment value of land and improvements, just as it is, right? So year after year. So table 5, where if you look at appendix 1, there's different target considerations. So target growth, target medium has certain valuations attributed to it per the appendix 1, and same with high. So as all things are happening in the residential sector here, as well as the other sectors, whatever happens in the light industry and business sectors is just being, I guess, bowled over by all things residential. So just as an alternative to looking at diversification of the tax base, we should be looking maybe at considering something specific to another given class.
And the percentages?
So the percentages in table 4 is just a breakdown of overall. So they don't add up to 100 because there's other classes, tax classes within there. So it's just can you see my mouse by chance?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so these are just a portion of that would compile to 100 with class 2 through 9.
So residential is 88.6% is?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Based on the projections.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think I agree. There's no sense trying to hammer a round peg into a square hole. I mean, we are what we are, and we should be pretty proud of what Colwood is. So I don't see, chasing particularly, in industry and business beyond what's sort of naturally available within our community. So yeah, I could see changing the targets. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jensen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jill, help me out for a sec. So if we do want to influence this, what does that look like? So what are strategies that other communities are using?
Here, I'm just going to go to this one. So, well, Ty earlier touched base on some other things that other communities do. And so for the purposes of this, we can consider other strategies. Staff would probably have to come back to you at a further date with what some of those things specifically could be relative to the Colwood context. But we could look at right now, just in front of us, is the different tax targets and assessment values and see what a comfortable target range would be based on what we're anticipating to happen, knowing the industrial, commercial, and residential development we're anticipated to undertake in the coming years.
My concern is that we chase the dragon here a little bit in that I think what I also heard from Mr. Whitaker was that there's a lot of question marks over the next couple of years. And I think there are so many good things going on, and I'm a little tepid to sort of muddy the waters for the progress that we've made. And I wonder if we influence in one area or attempt to achieve a target in one area, if we have an adverse effect in another area. That's more of a statement. Thank you, Jill. And back to you, Mr. Kobayashi.
Okay, thank you very much. The chair recognizes Mr. Borhill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
It's Mr. Earl here. I'm on Mr. Borhill's computer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Jensen's question. The good news story here is relative to the 2018 Collier's forecast. Given current market conditions on the commercial and the industrial side, we're going to meet and go past the expectations that we had in 2018. So fundamentally, it's a really good story in terms of the available land that Colwood has zoned for non-residential. We're going to develop at a pace that exceeds the 2018 expectations. The further good news story, however, is that residential is going to be moving along at the same and perhaps even an accelerated pace. And so, as Ms. Collison indicated, diversification will not happen, notwithstanding the fact that we're having substantive success on the development side in our non-residential portfolios.
Thank you very much. Councillor Day?
Thank you. I'm just hoping that Ms. Collinson could explain Appendix 2 for me, because I'm having a great deal of difficulty following those tables. I certainly understand that we're looking at year over year, but I don't understand where we're talking about medium growth versus high growth, how we come up with that definition.
Okay, through the chair. So within the report, Appendix 1 offers more of a broad snapshot of the different scenarios of things. And so to determine the valuation, what we did to determine, say, the high growth scenario is we looked at what we were projecting based on expectations year after year after year. And it's kind of, it's noted within the, let's see, land use section of the report, or sorry, within the looking forward of the reports. We forecasted our growth over the next 20 years of, 8,600 some odd dwelling units based on our demographic study and land yield analysis, as well as the updates that were associated with the development cost charges bylaw update. Similarly, the numbers for the square meterage about commercial industrial floor area and the industrial lands were taken from there. And then we split those across, so it was an annual rate year after year after year. And then there was some assumptions made about the valuation of given types of housing, a square meterage of commercial and lands, as well as valuation for industrial lands, and then applied that. So that's where the numbers have come from. And so the high ratio of the, 243 million for residential, 10 million for industrial, and 21 plus for commercial have come from there. And so to get to from the high to the medium, we just split it in half. And then from the medium to the low, split it in half again. They are hypotheticals. They're projections that offer, an assumption of if all things continue on the way today, if all things slow down to 50%, and if all things slow down 50% beyond that again. So they're just meant to offer a snapshot as to what we could see and what we could target.
Okay, so my follow-up question to that is, since what the report seems to be really hammering home is that the diversification will not happen. What I'm wondering is, where does that leave us in terms of affordability? So, there are costs that are associated with growth, specifically one of our big cost drivers being sewer capacity. But it seems like we're not looking at the other side of what do we have to spend to get that high, that medium, or that low number reflected here.
The projection valuations have just strictly been limited to new residential considerations, new commercial and new industrial, and not necessarily regarding the costs of those things developing out over time. I guess the only additional comment I could offer related to that is, as properties do rezone and develop out, the servicing requirements often correspond with the development of that property at the cost of the developer.
Right. So, but no consideration has been given to, there are some build outs that are not possible without very large projects taking place. So we haven't looked at all at what the cost of doing this development is what you're saying?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that it, Councillor Day?
Sorry, yes, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Baxter.
Hi, Jill, could we look at tables 4 and 5 again?
Yeah, let me just scroll through here. Here we go.
So table 4, as I understand it, is the annual additional valuation of new property that we're expecting. Is that right?
Correct.
And table 5 is what we might target instead. Is that right?
Correct. So you can see the differentiation in there is really in class 1 because table 4 offers a snapshot of what would be considered high. And so the difference there is the class 1 is slashed in half.
So can you explain why we would set a target where we reduce one of the 3 classes, but we don't increase the others? Why do we want to change the proportion by reduction rather than increase?
Over time and projected and moving forward, residential is expected to dominate. So part of the suggestion about moving towards looking at non-residential tax targets is to consider bringing emphasis to what is actually happening industrially and commercially. We know Colwood will continue to grow residentially. We are doing exceptionally well in all 3 areas, and the residential development is overshadowing our wins per se in the industrial and commercial sectors. So if we look at targets, high growth targets for industrial and commercial, it just provides a valuation that will emphasize the importance as well as, I guess, investment within those areas. It's just meant for discussionary purposes. There's always the option to reconsider the growth target for residential as well.
So my difficulty with considering that is the vast majority of residential will be built in Royal Bay and Royal Beach. The amount of other land that's available for residential construction is much smaller capacity, with only Colwood Corners perhaps coming anywhere close. And given that Royal Bay and Royal Beach are about to complete their rezonings, there is no way to stop that residential development proceeding at the pace that the developer finds matches what he can sell. So it doesn't appear to me that we would have any tools for modulating residential development to fit some target.
Ultimately, the rate is at what it is built out will be economically driven by the developer and what's happening in the economy at the time. You are correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. The chair wishes to recognize Mr. Barhill.
It's Mr. Earl again. I guess from my perspective, and considering chart table 4 versus table 5, administration's of the belief that if residential, industrial, and commercial all flow along relative to the market at high valuations and high development growth and high annual developments, these are the numbers that are going to occur. The idea of setting a target on the non-residential, or specifically the industrial or the commercial, administration could return with tactics that would focus our efforts on trying to nurture those, notwithstanding the market to a great degree will control what can and what may happen to residential, industrial, or commercial. We could pay particular attention to nurturing those developments. So rather than slowing down residential, the idea would be to how do we help draw attention to and or accelerate industrial or commercial to the greatest degree possible.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Earl. Councillor Parkinson again.
Yeah, so I guess I come from a a position of what will be. I mean, there may be some things we could do in the way of zoning land and OCP amendments to sort of, encourage businesses to go here or there, or commercial, or not as much residential. Pretty happy with our OCP. I think we're going in the right direction, a lot of things. So I'm sort of looking at what the recommendations are. So on the PowerPoint, the recommendation, the report be received. Well, I think everybody's pretty good with that. Non-residential development target be considered as per Appendix 2. But Appendix 2, just says, well, here are some other numbers based on what could be. If I look in the report, options, alternatives, the committee may choose to receive the report for information. The committee may also choose to consider tax-based diversification targets based on the percentage of total taxes paid by property classes as projected in Appendix 2. I think we've had a pretty fulsome discussion on where we want to go with business taxes and non-residential taxes. So I don't know if we want to consider that. Committee may also wish to consider Class 5 and 6 development targets as noted in Table 5 and projected in Appendix 2. So I guess, and I think we've had some discussion about that. I'm not quite sure I have yet grasped what we would do to alter development targets, short of, I guess we could zone more land. I'm not sure. Maybe Mr. Borhill or Mr. Earl could explain, or Jill, I'm sorry, what we would do if we wanted to change those development targets as opposed to just letting them evolve based on our current OCP.
Hi, Mr. Chair, Steve Burhill here.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'd just like to start by making a distinction between targets and essentially what could be possible if we changed our land use regulations and incentivization regime as it relates to different types of development. There are a number of different tools, as Mr. Earl mentioned, that are available to municipalities to incent or dissuade property markets from developing one or another types of new development. And I think what we're looking at here in terms of the targets are valuations that could represent a different future in Colwood if we decided to intervene in the land market by, say, potentially pre-zoning land. The Collier's report that was primarily compiled in 2018 and released in 2019 took a hard look at our land base. And a lot of the projections as to what's possible, particularly for industrial, related to what's currently zoned for industrial and what could potentially become industrial lands through future repurposing. And we're quite limited in that regard, particularly due to our existing areas of residential development, institutional development, and then also our topography. So given those characteristics, we are kind of limited in terms of how we'd approach incentivizing additional industrial development. And that was outlined in the Collier's report.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Ian. Councillor Baxter?
Yeah, I'd like to move receipt of the report and that we ask staff to come back with tools that we can use to encourage more business park, technology park type of development.
Okay. So that's the motion. I don't need a seconder on that. So let's have a discussion, or what part, Councillor Parkinson, do you have, is your question related to that motion?
Well, I was actually going to make the pretty similar motion, so
okay,
I'm good. Thank you.
So discussion on that motion. Mr. Earl, I assume, or is this Mr. Molnar, or who is this one?
Thank you very much, Councillor Kobayashi. This is Brent Molnar speaking. I was just going to reference the OCP, and I've got the privilege of having it in front of me so I can flip open to a page. And I'm looking at paper, otherwise I'd ask to share screen. But we are not softly moving into the area in and around the Island Highway. As some of us are aware, the Galaxy Motor site is being for sale and has now come in with options for consideration, which are largely forming into a development permit realm. We've also got activity from recent subdivision behind the courthouse to free up land back there as well. And so when I say we're moving into this area softly, it's because, you know, we subdivided the land about a year and a half ago. Galaxy Motors has been for sale for a little bit of time. We may see that change. We're in discussions with Peoples, but I have yet to see applications really fruitful in front of me, which allows me to speak about it with council. But the reason why I raised this area isn't to talk about all of those sort of factors, but more to talk about the existing OCP statements. Both the Ridley or Allendale Land District and this area that's bound by Suk Road in this portion are both contextualized as the same consideration, the OCP, which is mixed use employment centers. So we have yet to see some uptake in the Allendale lands, and that was the focus of one of my questions to Ty Whitaker about Colliers, about part of the built form, because I expect to see some things in your development permit. But when considering the lands, we should be also considering those land areas as undergoing change and undergoing a transformation. So I offer for that for the committee's consideration when tabling that last discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you. So I support the motion, but I'm left with some concerns, and that is in regard to, it really feels like we're looking at half of our budget. We're looking at our revenue potential, but we're not even talking about what investments are required in order to reach that. So I just wanted to be really clear. I think this is a great report, and staff have made a sincere effort to quantify the differences for the city, and you know, great presentation here today to help us to understand what the market conditions are out there. But we're still not really having any idea of what the bills are going to be month to month in order to accomplish these goals. So I just wanted to add that focus to the motion, which, you know, certainly when the report comes back, I hope that it will be looking at some sort of quantification to give us a level of comfort for our citizens, because ultimately, whatever this council decides to do, it is the citizens of Colwood who are backstopping all of these plans. And if the development doesn't happen, or it happens more slowly, or it requires expensive infrastructure in order to function, then it's the citizens who are on the hook. I want to be sure that we have considered the picture as fully as possible before we come to that decision. So I hope that that could be part of what comes back to council.
Mr. Earl, I think you have a comment on that.
Thank you. And while we have not done the analysis as part of this report, I think it is helpful to talk about the fact that currently Colwood is well on the path to financial sustainability, notwithstanding some further detailed work is needed with respect to capital assets. That said, even if only residential development were to occur from this point forward, it is a sustainable future for existing Colwood rate and taxpayers. Should portions of that in a larger and larger percentage form non-residential, either in industrial or commercial, that will only take us in a better direction. And so good news is that we are on the path to financial sustainability. If we were to accelerate our industrial or commercial, that puts us in an even better position.
Thank you, Mr. Earl. I just don't see any other hands, but I'm just going to throw in my 2 cents here. I would absolutely agree with you, Mr. Earl. This is the report that I've always been asking for, and I finally got to see it now. And I do agree with your conclusions. You know, it's pretty obvious. One of the great things that I learned out of this is that we've always used that 93% number, and always wondered where it came from, but that's actually an incorrect number. 93% is the residential portion of the overall assessed value, not the taxation itself. Because once you apply those the mill rates, in fact, the residential is about 77-78%, and the rest of it is non-residential. So that's one thing that I did learn. So we got to watch our terminology here, because in fact it is not 93%. But I do agree with you on this. It's very obvious if you just look at mill rates right now that the non-residential can bring up to, well, not including the farm side of it, but it's about 3.5 to 4 times residential. I'm supportive of the motion on the floor right now. I don't know how much more studying we need to do on this, but it's kind of obvious, intuitive to me. I actually ran through all the numbers and was firing off some emails to Jen, and but this was that one piece of information that I've always looked for. Now I understand a lot of my concerns are allayed a lot more, and I do agree with your conclusions, Mr. Earl. Anyways, at this point in time, seeing no other hands, I am going to call the question. All those opposed to the motion on the floor. And I was just wondering, Amanda, can you just reread the motion so that people understand what they're voting on?
Okay, so I believe that Councillor Baxter indicated that staff would have staff come back with tools that can be used to encourage more business parks, tech park type development. So we can call it business. Do you want to call it business or commercial, or how do you?
Non-residential.
Non-residential.
I think non-residential would be a good term for it.
Okay.
Okay.
So that staff come back with tools that we can use to encourage more non-residential development.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, did you slip your hand in there, Mayor Martin? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I did. Just to let you know, just while you call the vote, Councillor Jansen has not fallen off his chair. He's actually sitting in my office with me, but his so he's listening, but he's not on screen.
Okay, thank you very much. So all those opposed to the motion? Okay, seeing none, the motion has passed. Okay, we've got to get moving here. Let's move on to item 6.2. Joe Collinson, Senior Planner again. Could you introduce the item? Consideration of Housing Needs Report.
Thank you, Chair Kobayashi. I will just start this report here. So before we start, I'm just going to fill you in on what is a housing needs report. So it's a report that considers data about local demographics, economics, housing stock, and other factors to help identify gaps in housing supply today and in 5 years. So why did we do this? This is a newly legislated requirement and is intended to increase our understanding of current and future housing requirements, as well as provide the basis for development of housing strategies. We had a deadline to prepare the initial housing needs report, which we are about a year ahead of, as it has to be completed by April 2021. Housing needs report also legislatively now have to be updated every 5 years thereafter the initial one. To facilitate reporting, the province made grant funding available. So you may recall last September, your resolution of support for partnership with the CRD to facilitate this newly required reporting. We partnered with the CRD, who applied on our behalf for a grant via UBCM. Funds were used to hire Urban Matters, a consultant who undertook the reporting, which is included as Appendix 1. There's a lot of information in the report. So what's in the report? It provides information across needs across the housing continuum, as well as core housing need. Their legislated requirements linked to population, households, anticipated population, anticipated households, income, economic sector, labor force, housing units, values, as well as the core housing need. They had to look at today as well as projected and key areas of need, including affordable housing, seniors housing, rentals, homelessness, as well as provide a summary. And the summary is offered as Appendix 2. I'll offer a quick overview of Colwood's community profile, housing profile, and core housing need requirements. Population in Colwood makes up less than the other parts of Canada. Colwood attracted more domestic households compared to the CRD as a whole. We are also younger. The median age did rise slightly from 38.7 to 41.6, but we are almost 5 years younger than the CRD, who has an average age of 45 and a half. Our age distribution is similar. However, we have a higher proportion of households with kids, 42% versus 29% at the CRD, and a lower proportion of 1 to 2 person households. So it can be inferred we are a family-friendly community. We also have a higher income compared to some of the most of the region, actually, over the last 3 census count. Renter household incomes were less than that of owner households, almost a $30,000 split at $65,000 versus $93,000. So housing profile. So we are going to look at housing stock, the home ownership market, and as well as the rental market. So our housing stock here is slightly newer and more ground oriented, meaning the unit has direct access to an exterior street. However, our trends are showing that we're moving towards more apartments and townhouses. That being said, the single family home is still the dominant dwelling type, more than 50%, with most houses having 3 or more bedrooms. So 3 out of 4 houses are at minimum 3-bedroom home. Within the home ownership market, 74% of households are owned and 26% are rented. In both markets, prices have substantially risen in the past few years. The upward trend is significantly noted for condominium and apartment style dwelling units as well. So for apartments at the October benchmark price were affordable for couples with children who made the median income. However, the stock of housing was not appropriate, i.e. it did not have enough bedrooms to facilitate your typical family. So in the rental market, Colwood has seen pretty low vacancy and rising rental costs over the last 15 years. It's difficult for single parents to find a suitable sized accommodation that they can afford. So again, it's noted that 2 to 3 bedroom purpose-built rental, not very common. So the other thing that the report does look at, and we actually requested with the consultant and they did some additional work when it comes to core housing need. So now core housing need, it's an indicator, and it's a 2-stage indicator that helps to identify who needs housing assistance. It's been used in Canada via CMHC since the mid-80s. So assessing a household for core housing need looks to see if the household lives in acceptable housing and if the before tax income is sufficient to access that type of housing. So acceptable means, is it adequate, i.e. does it need new or major repairs? Is it affordable? Does it cost less than 30% of your total income? Is it suitable? Does it have enough bedrooms to satisfy the makeup of the family? So a household in core housing need does not meet one or more of those acceptability standards I just mentioned: adequacy, affordability, or suitability. And you'd have to spend more than 30% of your before tax income to pay the rent. If you are spending more than 50%, this then steps up to extreme core housing need. So as of 2016, we had a lower proportion of households in core housing need compared to the CRD, BC, and Canada. However, we are all increasing. Renter households have a higher chance of being in core housing need than owner households, 11% versus 2% in Colwood. And this number of the 11% renter households, it's primarily compiled of lone parent renters. So again, it's a close to a 80+ page report. I'll just go over a few highlights. So housing pressures are felt across the continuum and across the region. The cost of market housing is rising, particularly with renters and younger adults trying to get into the market. They cannot afford to transition into entry-level home ownership. You heard Ty mention earlier that part of why people are coming to the West Shore is because of the housing market costs. And employers have noted that it's difficult to recruit and train staff due to the cost of housing. Another highlight noted that we need more non-market housing, that housing unaffordability pressures impact lower income households, including single persons and those with disabilities. There's a growing population of low income individuals who cannot afford housing, and very much so in the last few years, an increased instance of hidden homelessness, i.e. living in vehicles or couch surfing. So just a couple of findings are noted up on the screen for you. You all are aware of our affordable housing fund. This was seen as a strength and something that could be considered exploration for other communities to undertake. Our non-market housing options are limited as they primarily serve seniors and those with health issues within the community. Affordable housing or non-market should be built close to transit services and a walkable environment to help reduce the burden of vehicle costs. And housing solutions that are specific to suburban community versus urban should be looked at. So all of this information, well, what's next? So as I mentioned, once we complete this first report, it's a requirement that this is received in a public open council meeting and also then published on our report. So that's a legislative requirement. The intent of this housing needs report is going to be used to inform development proposals. It'll also be used for our ongoing monitoring of housing stock as well as policy development. And if directed by council, next year we anticipate bringing forth a consideration of an amendment to update section 9 of the official community plan to reference some key pieces of this housing needs report. And then again, we will see that you again in 5 years with that update to the housing needs requirement. And that is it.
Okay, thank you very much, Jill. Before I open it up for discussion, I was wondering if I can please get a motion for the recommendation, and then I'll open it up for discussion. Okay, Councillor Day, thank you. Okay, so I'll open it up for discussion, and I'll let you start it off, Councillor Day.
Great, thank you. I've looked at this quite a bit just because of my roles on other committees, including the Family Court, where we've liaised quite a lot with the Single Parent Resource Center and other resource agencies. And I note that the report does lay out the challenges that exist for especially women-led single parent families. And one of the things that I think could be very helpful would be to lay out some sort of policies with regard to potentially supporting co-op housing in Colwood, where we lay out a few of the ground rules in order to ensure that that they continue to exist, 10 and 20 years from now, because many of the co-op housing that exists in Greater Victoria has basically kind of been eroded away by time and neglect and use, where many of the co-ops are operated by nonprofit organizations who haven't always been, keeping adequate monies in reserve to address issues as they come up. So as we establish maybe new and better options for young families in Colwood, that we ensure that they're being protected for the future, so that Quite a few of the ones that exist have people move into them and then they stay there for the rest of their lives, whether they've got kids anymore or not. And so the stock isn't rolling over to the next person who needs them. So I think a program that would encourage that and incentivize that type of long-term planning would be very beneficial. Thanks.
Thank you. What's co-op housing? Sorry, Councillor Day. Can you?
Sorry,
Co-op
co-op housing is where is run by a cooperative. So for example, you would have maybe several townhouse units who are run as a cooperative, and they would perform all the functions of their strata council and cooperatively manage the property for the benefit of the families that live there. So they would decide when to fix the playground and when to put a new roof on.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes Councillor Baxter. Mute, Mike.
Thank you. I have a question regarding the housing profile slide. There's the third statement, third bullet is non-market housing is not meeting demand, but there are additional units in stream. So my question is, when these additional units, the ones we know are coming, are in use, will we then meet that demand?
Through the chair?
Yes, thank you.
We are not anticipated to do so.
Okay, so any,
Sorry, could I ask Jill to repeat that answer? I didn't hear it.
No, we're not anticipated once everything that's in stream is built out. We are not anticipated to do so. However, there is always shifts in time as to what the needs will be in 2, 5, 10, or whatever the year is forward. So based on today, no.
so can you give us any idea of what sort of percentage of the need will still remain to be filled? And I'm only talking about current need.
I will have to follow up at a future date with that information.
Okay, that would be great if we could get that.
Councillor Baxter, the one other thing to note is because we are very much a regional locale, and many of the non-market housing providers are also regional. Sometimes, and it was inferred throughout the process, that just because you end up with a non-market housing place in Colwood doesn't mean you were from Colwood in the first place. So it's also part of the regional considerations as well.
Yeah, it's come up in discussions at the council table a few times that, you know, maybe we're doing more in this regard than other areas. And that is a real difficulty. Is, I guess, it would be possible to end up being the municipality that, or one of a small number of municipalities that does most of the servicing of this need. And that must be very difficult to separate. But I guess then the question that I would like to know the answer of, and I think there are other councillors who'd like that, is given the non-market housing need in the region, are we servicing a proportion of it that would appear to be a fair contribution by us? And I know there's a lot of assumptions have to be made in that. But is it possible to come up with some estimate along those lines?
Through the chair, I would have to follow up at a future date, but I can tell you that within the housing needs report in the non-market housing section, to date, there's a total of 320 non-market using units where BC Housing has a financial relationship. They're varied types of units. And there is an additional 428 units either recently completed or coming onto the market. But again, the report noted they're very regional run because of the housing providers. So I can follow up in the future as to where we sit and what would be to come.
Thank you. That's great. It also, on additional findings and considerations, says existing non-market housing options are limited as they primarily serve seniors and those with health issues. How could we change that?
Through the chair. Right now, with as you know, there is a rezoning that will allow for 120-ish units up there at 85 Belmont. That site used to be restricted to specifically seniors. With the rezoning application now complete, it is not a senior restricted building. So that would be one example of the step where we have already changed that.
Thank you. I was not aware of that change, but that's great. Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you very much. Chair, I'd like to recognize it's either Mr. Borhill or Mr. Earl.
Hi, it's Mr. Burhill this time, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So I just wanted to add to Jill's responses to the previous questions to say that when you look at the proportional amount of Colwood households that are facing core housing need, we are doing very well relative to the CRD and British Columbia in that if you look at private households specifically, and that's on page 37 of the Housing Needs Assessment Report, page 93 of the agenda package, we're sitting at about 8% core housing need for private households. CRD's at 13 and BC is almost double Colwood. So and if you look at how they define core housing need, it's tied to income. So in a strange way, we could be bringing new single family online, and if the market dictated that the cost of that housing was not in line with the incomes of the residents who are moving to Colwood, we could see core housing need go up by building more market housing. So that's just something to keep in mind as we move forward.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Parkinson?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just in support of what I've heard so far from Mr. Baxter and Mr. Borhill too. I think probably most of us have chased the housing market over our lifetime, where we've really extended ourselves to get into our first house or whatever, and probably would look statistically unhealthy and manage to wait a year or two and get promotions, a little more money where it doesn't so serious. So I worry about a report like this, and perhaps I was at the council table when we agreed that we would do it in conjunction with all the other CRD municipalities. And so therefore it goes out in the same format as the other municipalities. And yet, we just talked about how successful we've been in residential unit construction over the last couple of years. And here we have a report saying we need a bunch of residential units constructed. It seems to me that if we're going to publish this report or submit it, it should come with a made in Colwood addendum that says, yes, the report says we need this in the way of new housing development, and look at our predictions and our zonings that we've done to create that. Yes, there's a demand and always will be a demand for non-market housing. We've got some, we're getting a lot more. We're supportive of more in some areas of our community that we'll discuss. And, we've probably all heard rumors or perhaps some happening in some places down in southern Colwood. So it just seems to me that if you have 15 of these reports, whatever they are, sitting on the desk in the ministry, and they look at them all the same without realizing that in Colwood we are actually well ahead of the game in a number of ways, just doesn't sound like it's the right way to do it. I mean, we are being successful in a lot of the things they're looking for us to do. There's a lot of suites in here. I don't know how they factor in. We certainly have a lot of military housing, which factors into the non-market housing. So there's a lot of good things happening in Colwood, and just to submit a stock report is probably not the best thing to do. So I would like to see an addendum to this that really does basically outline the things that Colwood has done in advance of this report to show that we're in pretty good shape, which I think it will show.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Parkinson. Seeing no other hands on the motion, and I'll just repeat what that motion is again, that the report titled Consideration of Housing Needs Report be received, and that committee recommend to council that the City of Colwood Housing Needs Report be received and endorsed and posted on the city's website in accordance with Section 585 of the Local Government Act, and that staff to prepare a report outlining amendment considerations to Section 9, housing to the official community plan. So I'll call the question. Those, discussion, right? Pardon me, discussion more. Councillor Day?
Sorry, I just had a brief point that I think it's really important to, I think Councillor Parkinson is absolutely right. We should put a Colwood spin on this, but at the same time, I think that core housing need, we all remember when we were starving students and you know, probably paying our entire paycheck in order to pay rent. And there's a lot of downstream complications that come from youth or families not being well supported in their community. And not to say that it's all ours to address, but you know, the facts are that if we don't want to go down the road of places like Whalley and Surrey and Abbotsford with big homelessness issues and gang-related issues related to a lack of services, that we need to be aware of not only the costs of providing those services, but the benefits of diverting people towards programs that work. So there is no youth housing anywhere in the West Shore. There is no youth housing in Souk. There's very little youth housing downtown. So if we don't want to end up sending police and ambulances and the costs that come with that, then there is a really good argument for making sure that our community is well supported. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. Councillor Parkinson, is this related to the question or is this from your before? Did I?
No, I was hoping to make an amendment.
Okay.
I would like to suggest that we make an amendment on the first bullet that says that the report titled Consideration of Housing Needs Report be received. I'd like to see that we add to that with the words, and that a Colwood specific addendum be included to outline where the city is and expects to be on housing stock.
Okay, thank you very much. Any discussion on Councillor Parkinson's amendment? Mayor Martin.
Thank you. Can I get staff to comment on that amendment, please? Because I'm concerned that it's a little too vague and it doesn't give enough direction to staff.
Hi, Mr. Chair, Ian Burhill here.
Go ahead, Ian.
The proposed amendment would not pose any challenges to staff. And we are working with the communication manager on taking what is now a draft and very much Colwoodizing the document.
Okay, thanks very much, Ian. So I'd like to call the question on the amendment to the original motion. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, I shall consider that resolution passed. And on the original motion as amended, anyone opposed? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, I consider that passed. We'll go to item 6.3, Ian Burhill, Director of Long Range Planning and Sustainability. If you just want to introduce the item there, Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll go quickly because we are past 4:30 here. I just wanted to give the committee a opportunity to provide staff with feedback as to how you felt the Prosperity Roundtable that took place 2 weeks ago went. It's our first attempt at this new venue. So to remind the committee, it was the topic was Colwood's COVID-19 recovery. How are we doing? Emphasis on we in terms of it, both asking the question of how is the city doing in terms of our tactics and strategies, and how is the community doing. Some takeaways that staff that have in terms of improving the next meeting, which is scheduled for January 12th, 2021. And the theme of that meeting is Colwood Development Sector Outlook for 2021 and developer dialogue with the city. So what we're looking to is potentially have a guest speaker component. Now it would be very, very short given the limited time, but we thought potentially having a speaker from CMHC or another expert like Ty Whitaker did today provide some expert advice would be helpful. And also we want to share with the participants what we've done with the input provided at the previous meeting. I can tell you staff are right now working fast to identify ways in which we can address some of the requests and great ideas that came out of that last meeting, such as trying to find ways that we could provide space to people working out of their homes to have meetings in the community. Also, we'd like to, in the next meeting, better outline what's coming up in terms of the next themes and the next meeting date. So we'll try to build that into the agenda. Then also to attach background documentation to the meeting agenda. And we're thinking probably links that would help participants do a bit of homework before they get to the meeting. But I'd now like to pass it back to you, Mr. Chair, and provide the committee an opportunity for feedback.
Yes, please. Thank you. I've already provided mine. Sir, I don't know. I don't think we had that many counselors at that particular meeting. I think Councillor Baxter, you were there, myself, and I think that was it. I don't think Mayor was there. Councillor Day wasn't there. So, Michael, any feedback at all?
Only to say that I just think the whole idea of these meetings is great, and I love the feedback we get, and I hope we can actually turn it into more useful actions than we've already taken.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I just wanted to add my voice to say that although I wasn't able to attend the last meeting, I do think that it's very valuable work, and that having someone present to our community businesses would be very welcome, because if we don't provide some value at the meeting, we're not going to keep their attention. They have lots of important things to do. So I do think that having a short presentation by someone that staff feels can provide some useful information to our local businesses is a great idea.
Thank you very much, Councillor Day. And just because some of you weren't there, just to give you feedback from my perspective, we actually had to turn people away from this meeting. We had more people subscribe to it than what we could actually accept into the meeting. And it was this was a totally different cross-section of people. It was sort of the small businesses, a lot of small business owners, and it was really good to hear feedback from them. And of the 21 businesses that were represented, I think maybe 1 or 2 were hurting at this point in time. The rest of the businesses were actually saying they adjusted quickly and were thankful for actually the things that Colwood did. Very thankful. I did receive a couple emails, mainly text messages, but they were extremely happy that we were doing this, and they just hope this will continue on, because it was a direct link to, they love listening to each other, in fact. So there was a lot of that being shared. as well as having that direct link to the municipal councilor. So it was really good. So that's just my perspective in a nutshell. And on that note, anything else that you want to add to this, Ian?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. That was a great discussion, and looking forward to the January 12th meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. And on that note, next meeting is TBD. We will get back to you on that. And can I get a motion for adjournment? Where's Gordon?
Move adjournment.
Okay, thanks a lot. That's Councillor Parkinson. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll